These Small Hours with Russell Cordell Staker. This is the Small Hours podcast. I'm Russell Cordell Staker. I'm glad you're here with me. It's the evening of the 27th of November, 2023. I'm here in Austin, Texas, and I hope this is finding you in a good place wherever you may be. Way back in the middle part of March of this year, I wrote an essay, which I'm going to read here in just a moment, entitled What Fresh Hell Is This? And it's taken me a long time to come around to actually recording this. I've been busy, and there have been a lot of changes going on in a good way, which is a big reason why my podcast has been largely on hiatus most of this year. But I'm gearing back up, and I've got quite a few things that I'm going to get ready to produce here, hopefully in the near term. But I'm finally coming back around to this particular piece and wanted to read it today. And I'm going to do that here in just a moment. And when I finish the essay, I have some commentary. And I'm glad that it's taken me as long as it has to come to this. I've needed almost a year to think through some things based on what I wrote that's fitting, and I think gives some perspective, that things that I'm thinking about and considering as a writer and man in this crazy world of ours. And so what I'm going to do now is we'll seg briefly into the essay, and then on the backside of that, I have a few thoughts that I wanted to share. So this is What Fresh Hell Is This? One. Frederick Remington was 28 when he painted A Dash for the Timber in 1889. He kept intricate sketchbooks of his observations of the U.S. cavalry in the southwest frontier as it conducted surveillance and reconnaissance operations. He honed his technique with color and motion to vary contrast with the quality of light and shadow. He possessed a particular gift for portraying the gait of a horse in full stride. He felt an artist must know more than what he sees to fully render the purest form of an object in motion, to exaggerate a moving horse to achieve the desired effect. A Dash for the Timber is arresting. The grandiloquent image of a split second in time depicts 8 rough riders and 1 unmounted pack horse in a dead gallop as a violent war party presses to overrun them. 3 of those men in the lead are shooting over their shoulders, 2 with long rifles, 1 with a pistol, as they race for the cover of a phalanx of timbers just up ahead. The horses are strained to their mortal limit, nostrils flaring, eyes bulging in a collective lidless glare of terror. The steeds nearly appear to convey a desperate sense of drowning, gasping for air in plain sight. Remington painted a landscape of authenticity. 2. I had a graduate professor at the Center for Information and Communication Sciences at Ball State University who greeted me at the door to his classroom with a resounding, "What fresh hell is this?" Within the beat of this salutation, he'd wink, then smile. I admired the man. In life, we are usually too easily fooled. We are made to assume that the circumstance tied to the place we inhabit at any given moment is the reason for being there in the first place. We go to church on Sunday and remember to fear God, or the unknowns of the idea of God, whoever he might really be. We go to school to be measured against all we cannot know and ranked amongst our peers in an impossibly uneven manner. We are employed by corporations insistent and convinced of their own proximal hubris, where human capital is just an algorithm for an insular output and outcome. For all the power and importance shimmering in the halls of faith and learning and commerce, the single greatest deficit each suffers from is far too usually an utter lack of imagination. The world doesn't mind, it will proceed forward just as it always has, but the impact at an individual level has a fraying effect on the authenticity and purity of the self, and if we aren't careful, eventually we forget who we really are and the bright burning light we bring into the halls we pass through in life. I learned a lot in graduate school, but what I keep with me every day is the salutation my professor offered me when I entered his classroom. He was declaring something I haven't forgotten. He might have been suggesting something more. It is hard to know if he was. And all these years later, I can only speculate. What remains is a point of present consideration that maybe the only way to enter into any unknown is to do so with the fresh hell of authenticity. 3. My dad was a Yellow Page man. He was the best sales gun I've ever known. In our house above our mantel, he hung Remington's A Dash for the Timber. I saw that painting every day of my life. Sometimes I would take a moment and look really hard at it. If I wasn't looking at it, I was subconsciously aware of it, and maybe I knew it would remain with me long after I'd moved on with my own life. When Dad was on the road selling advertising for the Yellow Pages across Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, Utah, and Colorado, I never gave much thought about what it was he was up against every day, or the distances he covered to get where he was going, so that we had what we needed back home. He brought the fresh hell of his own authenticity every day of his life, and certainly to that job. The man never stopped moving. Today, when I see the Rough Rider on the furious black steed firing that long rifle over his shoulder in Remington's painting, I see Dad. He was always out there stirring up the possibilities he set in motion with the purity of his own authenticity. I wish Dad was around today so that I could tell him what I understand now as a man and sales gun of his own, making a dead gallop dash for the timber up ahead. Being authentic is hard. To stir the pot in pursuit of something real is high risk, and usually the reward comes far too late for a world hell-bent on short-term gain. Authenticity isn't about control, it's about vision and tenacity and narrative, and putting beauty into the void where color and light and shadow didn't exist until you arrived to paint it yourself. If your originality is pure enough, one day the rest of the world will see it too. Maybe not in a grand manner or as a framed painting on the wall above some mantle, but rather as a feeling of something you left behind as you passed on through. The hope is to make those important hallways less important and possibly more human, to change somehow, or to change how someone thinks, not about the world, but about herself. I hope when it's all over, I'm not asked on the far side of this great divide what title I achieved or how much I earned, lost, or never had a shot at. I want to be greeted just as I was by my professor at the Center for Information and Communication Sciences at Ball State University. What fresh hell is this? RCS, 19 March 2023, Austin, Texas. And I'm now just finally recording this on the 27th of November, 2023. I'm a fan of the artist John Mayer. Last year in 2022, my wife and I went to see him when he opened up the new Moody Center here in Austin, Texas. And I seem to remember the date. It was sometime in the early part of the summer. It might have been June of 2022. And if I got the date wrong, it's just because I'm misremembering. But his last full album was Sob Rock. It came out in 2021. And there's the whole album for me is great. And you can, if you're not a fan of John Mayer, that's fine. But I really love his stuff. And there's a song on that album that really speaks to me, and it's called I Guess I Just Feel Like. And I hope I don't get in any big trouble. I'm not going to read the full lyric here, but I want to share a couple lines from this because this song kept coming back to me over the course of this last year. and did not have any tie-in to the essay that I just read you. But as I've been listening to this, it came back to me just a few days ago. I was out driving around with my wife, and the song came on. And the song just, it evoked this feeling of like, you know what, maybe it's time now I can read the essay I just read for you. What fresh hell is this? The very beginning of the song, he says, I guess I just feel like nobody's honest, nobody's true. Everyone's lying to make it on through. I guess I just feel like I'm the same way too. And at the very end of the song, as he goes through this arc, and again, the song, you have to hear it because what I'm doing, I'm just sharing a couple of lines from the lyric. It's all in the guitar. It's in the tone of his voice. But he closes the song out. He says, the future is fading and the past is on hold. But I know that I'm open and I know that I'm free and I'll always let hope in wherever I'll be. And if I go blind, I'll still find my way. I guess I just felt like giving up today. And that line, giving up today, holy cow. Every time I hear that song, I know exactly what he was singing about. Maybe I don't know John Mayer, but I certainly know what he was getting at when he recorded that, because it strikes a chord deep inside of me. What the magic part of that line isn't what I just read you. It's what he does with the guitar right after he says giving up today. Because the song, it kind of comes down, it's like a low moment. And then all of a sudden that guitar kicks in, and it's symbolic because you get the sound of the guitar that he's not giving up today, and he's going to keep battling on. He's going to get up and grind. And you hear it in the lift in those first few bars on that guitar, and it's really, really strong. And I'm sharing that now because making a dash for the timber, this is a multifaceted essay for me. And I'm not going to give a lot of commentary about why I wrote it, but I'm going to talk about some things that are on my mind because of what came out of this when I wrote it back in March, and why I've probably been on hold in doing much with my podcast this year. Been busy with a lot of things. I'm excited because of new opportunities I'm working on in my personal life, with my family, and with my career. But I needed some time with this, and I think I needed to work through some levels of feeling like maybe I'm going to give up today. Maybe I'm done being a writer. Maybe there isn't any point in this. And I'm going to give a little tidbit here. I've gotten more fully into consulting in what seems to be, and it certainly is, the hot topic of the moment, and probably is going to be the commerce engine for the next decade in most of the tech and the business world, which is data science, data analytics, predictive analytics, data engineering, all the way up and through what we call generative AI or machine learning. There's a lot of speculation about, AI is going to take over the world, and what's the point of art anymore if a computer can just create the sounds and essence of the human heart and spirit? And I've even struggled with that. And if you've followed my podcast, or if you know anything about me, I tried at one point a few years ago, just 2-3 years ago, to make my way into the literary world. That got me nowhere, but I did my level best. I wrote a little tiny little novella. Nothing came of it. I applied to 2 prestigious writing schools, got rejected. And I'm actually glad things worked out the way they did, but I needed to make a full take or an effort to see if I could do it. And in the midst of this, then I changed career. I got out of doing some stuff that was it felt like a prison term for a while. I got into a different consulting gig for a while, and I just recently moved up into another role. And it's very much in the space of artificial intelligence and machine learning. And my point in bringing this up isn't to say that. It's that I've had this struggle, much like the song lyric that I just read from John Mayer. I guess I just felt like giving up today, because the one thing that I've always wanted to be is a writer. The one thing that I've always hoped to be is a writer. And when I read, or I get in front of a great piece of music, or I see a film, or I read a book or an essay or a poem or something, it just strikes deep at that chord. And there's this thing inside of me that says, I still want to be that. And yet then I look at the world I'm in, which is just chaos in a lot of ways. And then I see what's happening in technology, and I think, what's the point? I guess I'm going to give up. It seems like there's no room for the human space anymore. And what I want to tell you, if you're listening, and I'm telling myself, is that's not true. And that's what I'm going to talk about here for just a moment to round out the essay I just read about Remington's A Dash for the Timber, but also really about what I was talking about and what I learned from my professor when he would greet me at the door and say, what fresh hell is this? not long ago, I went to New York City for the first time in my life. I've flown into New York City 2 or 3 times over the last, 30 years, but I'd never gotten off the airplane. I've flown into LaGuardia, I think, twice, and I've been to JFK once before. But in all those occasions, I was passing through. So 2 of those flights, I didn't even get off the airplane. One, I actually got off and changed gates, but that was the extent of my experience until last month, when I signed on with the organization that I'm working for now that's based in New York City. And so I got the opportunity to fly into JFK and spend the better part of a week in Lower Manhattan and Midtown and walk the streets of New York City. And it was a thrill. I'm 49 years old, and I'm built for a city like New York. It was perfect. And I'm not going to get into all of what was just amazing to me, but I will tell you this. I wear two different pairs of Lucchese cowboy boots all week long, and walked those streets in New York City with my Texas boots, and it was awesome. And I'm 6'4", shaving my head. When I put those boots on, I almost come across as 6'6", and man, I tell you what, I felt that way, and it was exhilarating. The reason why I share this is that when I was there, I attended an interesting conference from a professor who's at Syracuse. His name is Shelley Palmer, and he's an expert in his field in generative AI and predictive analytics, data science, and he spoke as a featured keynote for my company, which I work for an organization called Blue Orange Digital, if you want to look us up. And I'm delighted to be there. This is a wonderful opportunity for me, and I'm basically building out the selling arm for what they're going to do in our professional services. So I'm building with clients. But the point I wanted to share is that while I was there, this gentleman, Mr. Palmer, spoke about basically the crossroads. And I'm going to use my own words here. This is what I took away. It wasn't so much what he said, it's what I heard in my heart and what made me feel like not giving up today, in the sense of the human spirit of what I'm after as a writer. We have our day jobs, we have our responsibilities, we have our things that are important to us. We also have what's deep down inside that we're pursuing, and we may not have a lot of time and effort to get there, but it's the art of life. It's not a luxury, it's a necessity. And sometimes life has a way of making us feel as if we need to supplant that it's not as important, not as vital, and quite frankly, it's expendable. And what's interesting is I'm listening to this professor who's very much in the space of artificial intelligence and machine learning, and he spoke about the crossroads of accepting the fact that we are at another point in our evolvement as a human race with technology. And by the way, AI, machine learning, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it. It sounds like it, but I'm not. It's not new. It's been around for decades, but we're hitting an acceleration point with this form of machine learning and the algorithm, and what we can do in a predictive, prescient manner based on language learning models and things that allow systems and devices to not only interconnect, but also to predict based on behavior patterns. And it gives us greater insight into things that we're considering, as well as things that we've done in the past, but also can anticipate in the future. And one of those aspects, of course, is the art of the human spirit. Mr. Palmer shared a painting that had actually been created by artificial intelligence in the span of a very short period. Maybe it was like 5 minutes, something like that. I'm going to say this wrong, but sequences were given to this artificial intelligence algorithm to paint a certain picture, and it produced this painting that to the naked eye looked very, not only real, but it looked beautiful. Now, to real artists, they can see through that, and what he pointed out is that when you really take a look at it, it's not fabricated, it's created, but it's synthesized, and that's the word I want to get at. And he spoke about the fact that through the history of mankind, as we have developed writing and communicating and various forms of technology, it continues to accelerate at an exponential pattern. And we continue to synthesize things that we've learned in the past, but we are hitting an interesting point now where that's going to go even faster because of what we can do with algorithms and predictive analytics, with machine learning, basically. And the buzz phrase is AI. I don't like using artificial intelligence. I don't think that gives the right kind of definition to what this is. But as he was speaking, all of a sudden, I'm hearing what he's saying from a a business perspective and also from a perspective of how this is impacting the world and whatever. But I started to internalize the message and think about what I want to talk about here, what I'm getting at, why I shared the lyric about John Mayer giving up, why I read the essay that I just read, which is that I'm making my own dash for a timber, a phalanx of cover up ahead as I'm stirring up my own possibilities through the authenticity of myself and the pursuits of my heart and ambition. And in doing so, I'm recognizing, as he was saying, that I still have something to say and do, even in a world that it may seem now more and more or less and less likely that that's ever going to have any kind of impact. And what I'm realizing is not only does that not matter, but secondly, even with the power of technology and things that can be synthesized, the choice that we have to make is, do we embrace the change and still put our voice to that? And in doing so, we still create a space of authenticity. And that gave me hope. And much like I was describing to you at the end of the song when John Mayer says, I've just felt like I was going to give up today, or I felt like giving up today. And then as I described to you, and I want you to listen to that song if you get a moment, the guitar kicks in. And this is where my own inner guitar kicked in, and I started to move again. And I said, wait a minute. All the things that you are, Russell, all the things that you continue to acquire in your mind, every time you pick up a book, every time you have a desire to write a sentence, those things are still vital, and even in this world today can be applied even with the synthesis of things that are going to go out there into the world. You know, we live in a time now where people are going to question, is that an authentic piece of art? Is that an authentic expression? Is that an authentic emotion? Is that an authentic idea or belief? And you know what? There will be question marks as a result of the world that we live in today. But I have this faith and this belief that authenticism, if that's a word, being authentic, being genuine, still shines through in spite of the synthesis that's around us. And I do believe that people have an ability to see what's real, even in a synthesized, hyper-synthesized world. And part of our job right now is to accept that as we make our own dash for the timber, whatever our pursuit is in life, to reach that other side because it's worth making the gallop. So I know I'm stretching a little bit, and that isn't why I wrote the essay. I want to be really clear about that. What I wrote at the time in March was something that came out from a very different space. I don't need to define that. If you want to hear it again, go for it. But it triggered a process of thinking that's taken me a year to put together, and that's why I'm finally in a place where I can record what I'm recording, because to me it seems clearer now. And I have a better sense of where I've been, where I am now, and where I'm going with the things that matter the most to me. David Foster Wallace, the late great writer who continues to be just a huge inspiration to me, in a discussion, and I'm not quite sure where I pulled this from, but I read it, and it might have been off of an essay, but he was talking a little bit about the idea, and this was a theme that it seems to come up a lot in his various writings, not only in his novels, but in the essays that he wrote, was he was pursuing a very important question. It's one that I think about a lot, which is, what does it actually feel like to live? There's the lyric that I've touched on maybe in one of my earlier podcasts from Rob Thomas, Little Wonders, in which he says, we will only just remember how it feels. That seems to also go in sync with, or syncs with, what I'm bringing up here that David Foster Wallace would put in consideration, is that what does it actually feel like to live? And he talked about being overwhelmed by choices. And this also, and now I'm going to put a little side thing here that goes back to what I just got done explaining with machine learning. In many ways, that's probably one of the great benefits of machine learning, is that it's going to help us not be so overwhelmed by choices, because in some ways it can help us predict a pathway of thinking. And I'm talking about systems now that may clarify towards greater gains. Now, of course, there's always negative to anything positive, and there can be misuse of things. But again, now I'll step away. Let's go back to what I was bringing up with David Foster Wallace, is that in this pursuit of what does it actually feel like to live and being overwhelmed by choices, he had reached a point in his own writing at some point in the trajectory, and I think this was shortly after he finished his major novel, Infinite Jest, which was published in 1996. And it was a phenomenally successful novel. It's an arduous read. I've read it once from cover to cover, but I've dipped into it for many years now, and I'm intending to get back to it fully this year if I can. But he, in describing some of his own frustration, and this is David Foster Wallace speaking, he'd said that I'd really kind of given up. I wasn't even that upset about not writing anymore. It was just more like, and then at a certain point, there seemed to be some kind of system for my reading. Now, what I just read sounded like a fragmented couple of sentences. That's exactly how he stated that. It was in a recorded interview. And if you flow with that, to me, it meant a lot, because I understood what he meant is that sense of giving up, which I've had over the course of this year, giving up this idea that I'm going to do anything worth writing. What's the point? But the system of my own reading always saves the day. It's the fuel that fires, that it lightens the fire. And the idea for me, as I continue to come back to reading, it doesn't matter, is that I feel like there's almost like this matrix out there, a system to my own reading that creates a kind of texture and a language that shows what the world is right now. Now, certainly as I and anybody else, when I look at the world, there is a lens through which I see that. But it's still important that I can take my own lens off, and that's where the reading comes in. And it's like putting on different forms of glasses to see the world as it is right now, not yesterday or even tomorrow, but through the lens of other writers, other artists, whether they're musicians or filmmakers or just great philosophers, or it doesn't matter. It's the idea that when you come around someone that's genuine, they're being authentic, they're kind, they're human, they're approachable, and in most cases, true artists are the ones that don't have the answers, and they'll be clear in saying that, but what they're projecting is something that gets us to think a little bit more. There's this sense that maybe I don't need to give up because there's a system behind the inspiration that comes, and that seemed to come full circle. So if you don't mind, before I round out this short little expression, I want to go back to the painting by Remington. I'm going to grab my notes here. And I posted this essay on my website, thesmallhours.com, if you want to look at it. And I think I think it's on my Substack, and I'm going to upload this podcast that I'm recording onto those links as well. And you can find me wherever you listen to podcasts. But I did put the painting by Remington onto my website and gave credit there. The Frederick S. Remington painting, he lived from 1861 to 1909. A Dash for the Timber was painted in 1889, and it's an oil on canvas, and it sits presently not far from where I live right now here in Austin, Texas, at the M. and Carter Museum of American Art in Fort Worth. And I want to just point out a couple of things in the painting. If you're familiar with the painting, it's highly recognizable. I don't think if anybody sees it, they're going to go, oh yeah, I remember this painting. But there are a couple of things that for me really stood out. The first, and I wrote about this, was the portrayal of the gait of the horse in full stride, fully rendering that purest form and motion, and the exaggeration that Remington puts into that. And the point I want to bring up here is that the exaggeration is important because he was able to see at a level that allowed him to expand upon the motion he had to, so that when you look at the painting, it actually feels like you're right in that moment of seeing the horses moving. And it's a difficult thing. I'm not a painter. I have no idea how anybody could actually capture that, but that's what made Remington very stirring as an artist, is that he could capture motion like no one else could. He was authentic in his vision, and he was authentic in his ability to use color and light. And this is where I'm going to draw back to what I just said about AI. At his point of living, when he painted in 1889, still photography was starting to come into the picture, and he got a lot of criticism from various people because he used photography in helping him to paint. And he would take still photographs of horses and various situations in the West. He loved painting the Western scenes that he became famous for. But he would use those, and then from there would synthesize motion to articulate the sense of motion that no other artist had actually been doing up to that point. And so he would get criticism because some artists said, well, that's not true art. And I would point to what's happening today, and it's not too far of a stretch. You know, I read all the time about certain actors or writers that are up in arms about what's going on with AI. I'm not very happy about certain aspects of what's happening with the evolution of technology either, because it's largely unknown. We don't know where this is actually heading. But I have a belief and an attitude that is less based on fear and more on curiosity. And I think that's the message I'm trying to convey with this, is that much like Remington, whatever our form of expression is, in spite of the world that we live in, we have to synthesize a little bit, and we still put our own personal take on things based on what we see. And maybe the motion we record, whether we're an artist or not, is what we see in the world today, but there might be an opportunity for us to utilize some of those things we may initially be afraid of and say, you know what, I can still be my true authentic self in spite of the fact that it feels like everything's being taken over by something that is robotic or algorithmic or mathematical to the point where maybe the human touch doesn't matter anymore. And that's the distortion that we need to get away from. And again, I'm not trying to over-rotate. That's not the message here, but it seems to be a theme that came back to this idea of it's okay, keep going, don't give up. If to live in the world today is simply to put beauty into the void, where color and light and shadow didn't exist until we arrived to the point we find ourselves in, then I can't think of a greater inspiration to say it's worth the fact that we have to tell ourselves, regardless of what our interests are in life, to keep going, to embrace the changes, much like people before us have done throughout the eons of time. And that making that dash for the timber, whatever that is, whatever's up ahead, and the stirred up trouble that we may put behind us, and I don't mean trouble necessarily in a bad thing, but maybe we are being chased by time. Maybe we're being chased by our own demons, our own sense of things that we didn't succeed at, but we're moving forward, or at least attempting to. Maybe we feel like we've given up. We're on the sidelines. We're not moving at all, that the timbers up ahead are unreachable. But if we can remind ourselves that there is something worth pursuing in putting our own authentic beauty and our own touch of the light and shadow that we see through our own lens, if it's genuine, if it's authentic, and I will say this, if it's kind. There are too many fell voices in this world today, too many ignorant voices. And I'm not saying that I'm smarter than anybody else. I'm talking about ignorance in the sense of speaking before understanding. And that's something that I'm striving to be better at. But if we can put that kind of beauty into the world that we live in, we make it better for ourselves. We're going to achieve a distance that we've wanted to get to. And along that line, I do believe people will also be inspired by it, because we don't know the power that we have in the moment, which is right now, even if we have to synthesize some of that and utilize certain things that come along, tools, technologies. All of that's just part of the world that we live in. But ultimately, as we pass through this, our moment is now, and it's what we do with it that makes the most impact. I want to close this thought out and round out what I'm trying to get at today by talking about a scene in one of my all-time favorite movies, the 1969 film with Paul Newman, Robert Redford, which is Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid made a real good career at stealing money from trains and made a good living along the way. But at a certain point in the story, they start being tracked by the mysterious man with the top hat, or the high hat, and his posse, probably the federales, as they would call them. And the famous line in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid is they're trying to evade and escape these guys. They keep turning around as they say to each other, "Who are those guys?" Well, they realize they've got to get out of the West, so they head down to South America. And I think in the story, if I remember correctly, they end up in Bolivia. And Butch and Sundance decide they're going to go legit. They're going to go get a day job and just kind of lay low for a while. And so they end up meeting with this kind of hayseed cowpoke guy that himself, he's probably from the West, but he's come down south as well. And he ferries money between the banks of various local areas, but they're in Bolivia, up and down this particular ravine. And he needs a couple of hired hands to keep him safe as he's doing so. But in order to do that, the job interview is to make sure that these guys are actually good with their guns. And Butch Cassidy he's the wise guy. He's the one that has the experience and the depth, but the gunslinger Sundance Kid. And so this guy comes up to Sundance and he says, pulls out his 6-shooter out of his holster. He says, "It's a mighty fine piece you got there. Can you shoot it?" And Sundance very tersely responds, "Sometimes." He says, "Well, shoot this." And he takes a hunk of metal and throws it out in the middle of this dusty old street. And Sundance his feet are firmly planted on the ground, and he responds after being nudged a bit to shoot that hunk of metal. But he has to, reach down, and he pulls his 6-shooter out of his holster and he shoots and he misses. And the man spits into his hand. He says, "I see." Starts to walk away. Job interview's over. They're not getting this job. And as he's walking away, Sundance says, "Can I move?" And the man turns, kind of half turns, and he says, "Well, why in hell would you have to move?" And as he's saying that, Sundance literally moves his feet, unholsters his 6-shooter, and fires and hits that hunk of metal. And then as it's up in the air, he shoots again and hits it a second time. And he says, "I'm better when I move." I love that scene. And I'm going to end right here by simply saying this, that the motion of our own authenticity, the motion that Remington was getting at, that's the fresh hell that we bring. And we have to be in motion. We can't stand on the side and wait to get to that phalanx of timber that's up ahead. We have to do it with our own authentic stride, because the targets we're going to hit are the ones that we have to try in our own space. And rather than giving up today, we got to keep going. Find that gear, find that extra guitar stroke, whatever it is, to just keep going, because the art, the authenticity, the genuine nature that we have, that's the fresh hell that will change the day, not only for ourselves and maybe get us to where we're going, even though we may not always know where that is, but it might also be the thing that carries somebody else down the line. And that's what keeps me going. And that's why I'm back doing this again. In addition to the other things that I'm going to pursue in my life, this is the one little steady beat that even if it's just for myself, it's something to say, you know what, I'm going to make my move, and I'm better when I move. And to that professor that I had all those years ago at Ball State University, I think he'd be proud enough to say, what fresh hell is this? Thank you for being with me here in these small hours.